There is a verse in the Bible that has been quoted at anxious people for centuries. It has been printed on coffee mugs, stitched into throw pillows, and shared in text messages at 2 inches the morning by well-meaning friends. These friends don't know what else to say, and yet for most of the people who receive it, it doesn't work. Not because the verse is wrong, not because God forgot about you, but because nobody ever explained what it actually means. Nobody ever told you what Paul was really saying when he wrote those words from a prison cell in Rome. Nobody unpacked the mechanics, the actual spiritual and psychological mechanism underneath the words that makes this verse not just a comfort, but a cure. Today that changes. By the time we're done here, you're going to understand Philippians 4 to 6 to 7 inches a way you probably never have before. Not just what it says, what it does, how it works, and why anxiety, even the kind that has followed you for years, doesn't get the final word in your life. But before we get to the solution, we have to understand the problem. Because anxiety isn't what most people think it is, and if you misdiagnose the problem, every treatment you try will fall short. Here's what anxiety actually is. At its most basic level, anxiety is your brain's attempt to solve an unsolvable problem. Something is uncertain in your future. A relationship, a diagnosis, a financial situation, a child who isn't where you thought they'd be by now. And your mind locks on to that uncertainty and starts running calculations. What if this happens? What if that happens? How will I survive if the calculations never end? Because the uncertainty never resolves. Because the future never becomes certain enough to satisfy the part of your brain that needs certainty to feel safe. And so you lie awake and your chest tightens. And that thought, the one you were doing so well not thinking about, surfaces again at the worst possible moment. In the middle of a meeting, in the quiet car ride, in the space between waking and sleeping, when you have no defenses left. Does this sound familiar? Let me tell you about a woman named Elena. Elena had been a Christian for over 20 years. She knew her Bible. She led a small group on Wednesday nights. She served in her church and prayed every morning. And she had anxiety so severe that some days she couldn't leave her house. Not because her faith was weak, not because she wasn't trying hard enough, but because everyone around her, including people she respected, had handed her the same prescription. Just trust God more. Just pray harder. Just believe bigger. Just read Philippians 4 to 6. You know the one. Do not be anxious about anything. Just stop being anxious. As if she hadn't thought of that. There is something quietly devastating about being told to stop feeling the thing you can't stop feeling. It doesn't produce peace. It produces shame. And shame piled on top of anxiety is one of the heaviest burdens a human being can carry. So let's actually read this passage. Not skim it, read it. Because the answer is in there fully and completely, but it's hiding in plain sight. Philippians 4 to 6 and 7. Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Now, most people hear the first 4 words, "do not be anxious," and stop there. They hear it as a command, a prohibition. Stop doing the thing. As if Paul is a police officer writing you a ticket for the crime of worrying. But that's not what this is. Paul is not writing from a comfortable office. He is writing from prison. He has been beaten, shipwrecked, stoned, abandoned, betrayed. He knows suffering at a level most of us will never approach. And he is not dismissing anxiety from a position of ease. He is speaking from the other side of it, from a place of discovered peace. And he is handing you the map he used to get there. The command is not stop feeling anxious. The command is do this instead. Watch the structure of the verse. Do not be anxious about anything, but that "but" is everything. Paul is not saying refuse the anxiety. He's saying redirect it. Here's where to put the energy anxiety wants to spend spinning in circles. Here is what to do with the weight you're carrying. But in everything by prayer and petition. With thanksgiving, present your requests to God. 3 words buried in that instruction change everything. With thanksgiving, not pray desperately, not pray frantically, not storm the gates of heaven demanding God fix your situation immediately. Pray with thanksgiving. That word has confused people for generations. How do I give thanks when everything is falling apart? How do I feel grateful when the diagnosis is bad, when the marriage is broken, when the prodigal hasn't come home? Here's what Paul means, and here's where the mechanism clicks into place. Thanksgiving is not a feeling you manufacture. It is a declaration of what you already know to be true about God, regardless of what is currently true about your circumstances. When Paul says pray with thanksgiving, he means come to God not just with your problem, but with your history. Come with the memory of every time he came through before. Come with the record, however imperfect, of his faithfulness in your past. Come saying, God, I don't understand this. I am frightened. I am overwhelmed, and I know who you are. I know what you have done. I know you have not changed. That end is transformative. It doesn't erase the fear. It puts the fear in context. It places the anxiety inside a larger story, a story that doesn't end with your worst-case scenario. Let me show you this in action because it's scattered all through the Psalms. Those raw, unfiltered prayers that read less like devotionals and more like someone actually talking to God. Psalm 77, the writer. Asaph opens with one of the most honest prayers in all of Scripture. He says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. He cannot sleep. He is too troubled to speak. His spirit is in despair. Does this sound like someone who had it all together? But then, something shifts. Verse 10 and onward, Asaph begins to remember. He starts asking himself what God has done before. What do I actually know about him? Not just what I feel about him right now, but what I know, he says. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. He preaches to himself. He interrupts the anxiety spiral not by suppressing the feeling, but by introducing a competing truth. Not a denial of his pain, but a declaration of God's character that is larger than his pain. That is the thanksgiving Paul is talking about. Not manufactured happiness, but deliberate remembrance. This is why anxiety lies to you so effectively. Because anxiety only deals in the present problem and the imagined future catastrophe. It doesn't show you the full picture. It shows you the storm and hides the anchor. Thanksgiving forces you to look at the anchor. Now let's talk about what happens next in the passage, because verse 7 is the payoff, and it is extraordinary. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Notice the verse doesn't say, and then your problem will be solved. It doesn't say, and then the diagnosis will come back clean. It doesn't say, and then everything you were afraid of won't happen. It says, the peace of God will guard your heart and your mind. The Greek word translated guard here is a military term. It means to stand watch, to garrison, to post soldiers at a gate. Paul is describing the peace of God as a standing army, stationed at the entrance of your inner life, keeping watch so that panic doesn't breach the walls. And the peace itself, Paul says, transcends all understanding. There will come a moment when your circumstances haven't changed. The problem is still there, and the uncertainty is still real. And somehow, inexplicably, you will find yourself breathing. Somehow you will find yourself held, not because the storm stopped, but because something steadied you in it. Let me tell you about another man. His name was James. He was a surgeon, meticulous and detail-oriented. His entire professional identity was built on control, on certainty, on knowing exactly what came next. And then his youngest son was diagnosed with a serious illness. And for the first time in his adult life, James found himself in a situation he couldn't operate his way out of. He couldn't research his way to certainty, and he couldn't work harder and fix this. He came to his pastor desperate, not knowing what to do with the anxiety that had moved into his chest like an unwanted tenant. His pastor didn't tell him to stop worrying. He asked James a different question. He said, "Can you tell me one time in your life when you were completely convinced God had abandoned you and it turned out you were right?" James sat with that question for a long time. He couldn't think of one, not one single moment in his 47 years when God had actually left him to face something alone. Though, there had been plenty of moments when it felt that way. Looking back, every one of those moments had something in it. Some grace, some provision, some presence that he had only recognized in hindsight. That conversation didn't heal his son immediately. The journey was long and hard and filled with moments of fear. But James told his pastor months later that something had changed in him that day, not his circumstances, his posture. He had stopped trying to see the whole road and started walking one day at a time, with his eyes on the one who could see further than he could. That is Philippians 4-6, lived out in real life. Now, I want to address something that needs to be said directly, because if we don't say it, this whole conversation will feel like it's missing something. For a significant portion of the people watching, some anxiety is clinical. Some anxiety is rooted in brain chemistry, in trauma, in physiological realities that require professional care, and there is no Bible verse, no matter how true or powerful, that is a substitute for that care. God gave us medicine, God gave us therapists, and God gave us the science of the human mind. And using those resources is not a failure of faith. It is wisdom and stewardship of the body and mind God gave you. What Philippians 4 offers is not a replacement for those things. It is what you bring into the room alongside those things. It is the foundation of security that can hold you even as you do the hard work of healing. The peace of God and the help of a counselor are not in competition, they are companions. Let's go back to the passage one more time because there's something else embedded in verse 6 that most people read right past. But in everything, not just the big fears, not just the life or death situations, everything that word matters. Because anxiety has a remarkable ability to scale, it starts with the serious things. And then once it gets comfortable in your life, it starts attaching itself to smaller things. These include the traffic and the awkward text message someone didn't respond to. It also includes the meeting you have to run tomorrow and the thing you said 3 weeks ago that you keep replaying. Paul's instruction covers all of it. There is no category of worry too small to bring to God. There is no prayer too mundane, no fear too embarrassing, no anxiety too trivial. In everything, that means the specific, named, concrete thing that is keeping you awake tonight, not just God. I'm anxious, but God. I am afraid that this specific thing is going to happen, and I cannot stop thinking about it. And I need you in this exact spot. The specificity matters because a vague prayer gets a vague sense of peace. But a prayer that names the fear, that drags it out of the dark and into the light, does something to the fear. Something shifts when you say it out loud to God instead of just thinking it endlessly to yourself. There is something about spoken prayer, about externalizing the internal storm, that interrupts the loop. Psychologists call it cognitive reappraisal. Ancient Christians just called it prayer, but the mechanism is real. I want to take a moment and talk about what Paul doesn't promise in this passage, because honesty matters here. He doesn't promise the thing you're afraid of won't happen. He doesn't promise your prayers will all be answered the way you want them answered. He doesn't promise a life without storms. What he promises is presence inside the storm. What he promises is a peace that doesn't require perfect circumstances to exist. What he promises is a God who is not surprised by your situation and who is not overwhelmed by what overwhelms you. He has not looked at your life and decided it was too complicated. There is a story in the Gospels that I think about often when it comes to anxiety. Jesus and his disciples are on a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee. A storm rises, one of the violent, sudden squalls that the sea is famous for. The waves are crashing into the boat, and the disciples are terrified. And Jesus is asleep in the stern. They wake him and say, essentially, "Don't you care that we're about to die?" And Jesus gets up and speaks to the wind and the waves, and the storm stops. And then he asks them something. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Now, that verse ripped out of context sounds like a scolding, like Jesus is dismissing the very real danger they were in. But look at what he actually did. He didn't tell them to feel less afraid. He addressed the thing they were afraid of. He entered the storm with them and calmed it. But notice, he was in the boat the whole time. He was present in the storm before he calmed the storm. He did not wait for perfect conditions to be with them. That is the promise underneath Philippians 4. Not that God will always immediately remove the source of your anxiety, but that he is in the boat, that the peace he offers is possible in the middle of the storm, not just on the other side of it. Let me give you something practical. Something you can actually do tonight or tomorrow morning or whenever the anxiety rises. The prayer Paul describes in verse 6 has a specific anatomy, and when you pray it intentionally, following the shape he gives it, something happens. Start with thanksgiving before you get to your request. Name 3 things you know to be true about God, not 3 things that feel true right now. 3 things you know: He is faithful. He has not abandoned you before. He is not limited by what is limiting you. Start there, anchor yourself there, then name the fear specifically. Say it. Say it out loud if you can. God, I am afraid that. Then finish the sentence completely honestly. No spiritual language, no cleaned up version. The real thing, the actual fear, the exact worst case scenario. Your mind keeps running, give it to him by name. Then release the outcome. This is the hardest part. Say something like, God, I don't know how this resolves. I don't know what you're doing, but I trust that you are doing something. I trust that you can see this whole thing in ways I cannot. I'm putting this down. I'm leaving it with you, and then stop. Don't pick it back up. Don't immediately start the calculations again. Give the peace of God a moment to arrive. It may not be instant, it often isn't, but it comes for many people. It comes in the middle of the night, in the strange quiet after the prayer, when they realize their breathing has changed and the grip on their chest has loosened, not because the problem is solved, but because they are not carrying it alone anymore. I want to come back to Elena, the woman I mentioned at the beginning. She led this small group and served faithfully and still couldn't get out of bed some days. She eventually found her way to a good therapist who helped her understand the clinical dimension of what she was experiencing. And alongside that work, she rebuilt her prayer life, not as a performance or a duty, but as a conversation, specific, honest, grateful, not for the struggle, but for the one walking through it with her. She told me once that the change wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was more like learning to breathe differently. Like her lungs had always been capable of taking in more air, but she'd spent years taking shallow breaths. And slowly, painfully, she learned to breathe deep again. Philippians 4-7 says, "The peace of God will guard your heart and your mind." Elena said it felt exactly like that. Like something was watching the door. Like the panic attacks didn't have full access anymore. Like there was a buffer between the fear and her core self that hadn't been there before. Not perfect, not finished, but real. Here is what I want to leave you with. Anxiety tells you a story. It tells you that the outcome you fear is likely, that you cannot survive it if it comes. It tells you that God is either unaware of your situation or unwilling to help. It tells you that the fear is the truest thing about your life right now. Every single one of those claims is a lie. The Bible's answer to anxiety is not suppression. It's not positive thinking. It's not telling yourself everything will be fine when you don't know that it will. It is a reorientation, a turning of the whole self toward a God who is bigger than the thing you're afraid of. A specific, honest, grateful conversation that says, here is what I'm carrying, here is what I know about you, here is what I cannot control. I'm choosing to trust you with what I cannot control. And then the peace comes, not always immediately, not always completely, but it comes. It transcends your understanding because it is not produced by your understanding. It is not contingent on your circumstances resolving it. It is not a product of positive thinking or mental discipline. It is the peace of God. It is given by God to people who have run out of their own peace, and they have finally come to the right place to find more. You are not too anxious for this to work. Your situation is not too complicated. Your fear is not too big. And God has not looked at your life and decided you are beyond the reach of this promise. Paul wrote these words from a prison cell with chains on his wrists, facing a trial whose outcome could mean his execution. He wrote about peace. It was not a future hope for when things got better. It was a present reality in the middle of the worst circumstances of his life. If the peace of God could reach Paul in that place, it can reach you and yours. Bring it to him, all of it. The fear you've been too embarrassed to say out loud. The worst case scenario you've been rehearsing in your head. The thing that surfaces at 3 a.m. when everything is quiet and the anxiety is loud. Bring it with honesty, with gratitude for what you know to be true. Even when you can't feel it, Bring it with a specific, named, concrete weight of it. And then let the peace of God do what it promises to do. Let it guard the door. That's not a platitude. That's not a throw pillow verse. That is a promise from the God who was in the boat in the middle of the storm, who is in your boat right now. He has not once in all of human history abandoned anyone who came to him with their fear. Do not be anxious about anything, not because anxiety is a sin, not because your fear isn't real, but because there is somewhere to put it. There is someone to give it to, and the peace that comes from giving it is beyond anything you can produce on your own. Start there. The rest follows.